Basically, I mean, that's sort of what gave the start to this research path that I came on. But I was looking at even earlier texts in the Book of the Dead. There was the pyramid texts and the coffin texts, which preceded it. So the deceased leaves the body, enters into darkness, encounters a being of light in the form of the sun god Re, meets deceased ancestors and relatives, people who were obviously died before them. And as you said, goes through a process of the evaluation of their life, which is, thematically comparable to the life review in NDEs.
Welcome to the crossroads of the known and the unknown. This is ajparr's Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
Okay, we are here with Gregory Shushan. He's one of the most renowned specialists on near-death experiences and ancient civilizations, ancient cultures. Welcome, Gregory.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on.
The Book of the Dead mentions certain commonalities found in near-death experiences. For example, seeing a bright light.
Yeah.
I think it has been reported in by the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Also, the fact that there is like a life review or an afterlife judgment. Can you explain that?
Basically, I mean, that's sort of what gave the start to this research path that I came on. But I was looking at even earlier texts in the Book of the Dead. There was the pyramid texts and the coffin texts, which preceded it. I mean, the Book of the Dead is something like 2/3 includes those earlier texts in them. It just gives more and more detail. As time goes on, there are more and more details, especially of punishments and going through different tunnels and labyrinths and meeting demons and things like this. It got more mythologized as time went on. But basically, yeah, even from the pyramid texts, there are descriptions of, the soul obviously leaves the body because the mummy is still on Earth. It travels through darkness, through different kinds of caves, through what they refer to as the netherworld in the sky. So it's the sun travels around, below the Earth, and the other world is in the nether sky. So it's not actually underground, but it's deep below, and that's the realm of Osiris, who is the god of the dead. But the sun travels there and brings light to that realm of the dead, and then travels back to the top. So the deceased leaves the body, enters into darkness, encounters a being of light in the form of the sun god Re, meets deceased ancestors and relatives, people who were obviously died before them. And as you said, goes through a process of the evaluation of their life, which is, thematically comparable to the life review in NDEs. It's not a panoramic life review like people who have near-death experience describe, experiencing everything at once, and experiencing the emotions of everybody that they'd interacted with. So there's no description of that. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. It's just we don't have a description of it. There's a text called oh God, I can't remember what it's called. I think it might be the Teachings of Mary Kare, but anyway, it's an early Egyptian text, and that has what's called a negative confession, where the person or the text talking on behalf of the person describes all the things that they didn't do. So, I didn't kill anybody who didn't deserve to be killed, or I didn't swindle anybody, I didn't rob anybody. But within this, it says something like his life was laid out before him in an hour. And to me, that sounds a lot like a kind of panoramic life review.
Right. It sure does. And then there's this thing about the feather.
Yeah. The heart, the soul is sort of weighed against the feather and the heart, and which one is heavier, as determines your fate, essentially. So if you pass that test, then you're allowed to, progress into the more positive aspects of the other world. But
so what makes the heart weigh more and what makes the heart weigh less? Would you
The
say that
positive,
the heart represents the ego?
it's more about your positive deeds versus your negative deeds.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and and maybe symbolically, the intention you went into with your deeds. I don't know, maybe that's where the heart
Okay.
symbolism comes from specifically. But then another interesting thing is then from in the pyramid text and coffin text, there's really not much stress on punishment and kind of death and negativity. It's really with the Book of the Dead onwards. Um, and that's a correlation, direct correlation with how more accessible these texts become. So when they're only in pyramids, they're really just written on the walls of the pyramids. They're carved there. They're not portable. They're not accessible to just the common people by and large. And coffins, kind of slightly more elite people could afford to have them inscribed in coffins, but still poor people wouldn't really be able to have that access to that. But as they became available on papyrus, which was much cheaper, they became more widespread, these afterlife beliefs. It's not to say that people didn't have them in the past. It's just the kind of, maybe the ritual technology embodied in those texts wasn't as widely available. So then you get to the later and later periods, and there's more and more emphasis on the threat of punishment and the promise of salvation and a glorious afterlife. And I think that's really corresponds to a kind of elite tool of control that the priesthood um, realized, this religion is getting more and more widespread, is becoming more permeated within all levels of society. So we can use it as a way to bribe people to behave better.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's what the same
Mhm.
happened with the Catholic Church. Okay.
Yeah,
So I understand that the heart, returning to the topic of the heart, in ancient Egypt was thought to be the source of our thoughts and not our brain. And
right.
also the Greek philosophers believed that, that everything we think and feel comes from the heart. So maybe
Mhm.
that could be part of the explanation of why the heart was weighed.
Right.
And there's also another thing. They admitted the existence of the soul and also of the life energy.
Yeah, there's the animating life force that's not the conscious self, which is the ka, and then the ba is the conscious self that actually has the experiences in the other world. But something that's really interesting about that, which is also a parallel to NDEs, is there's a real emphasis in these texts about the soul not just encountering the sun god Re or the afterlife god Osiris, but recognizing that they're one and the same, that they're identified with these deities.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's
Interesting.
there's even a very specific passage in the coffin text where the soul goes into the sort of cave, the underground realm of Osiris, and sees the body of the god Osiris sitting there rotting, basically. And it's quite a graphic description. They call it they refer to the efflux of Osiris, which was to stress that it's the fluids from his body leaking out as he's rotting, basically. And the soul needs to recognize that he is also that Osiris. And what I speculate that is it's a symbolic version of the soul leaving the body after death and seeing the dead body lying there. And in many, many, many near-death experiences around the world, it's that particular experience that makes the person realize that they're dead.
Yes.
Before that, they're thinking, wow, this is a strange thing. What's this state I'm in? And then they look down and they see it and they think, wow, that's me, but how can I be me from this, different vantage point? So that's the kind of the crucial turning point where they realize, okay, I'm dead, and now I have to make a decision. Do I try to go back into that body or do I follow the light or whatever? So in the Egyptian text, it's the same message. It's once you realize that you are that body and that you are one with Osiris and that you're also separate from that body, you've transcended your own death. It's really about the realization of transcendence of death, but still being conscious. At that point, you're able to progress into the next stage of the other world.
What is that next stage? I mean, do people who pass the test go somewhere and those who don't go somewhere else?
Yeah, it is a bit difficult with the Egyptian text because there are references to annihilation. And so I guess if you don't pass all the different phases, then you're just obliterated, basically. But there are also, earlier scholars would talk about contradictions within these texts because sometimes they'll say, the divinized person will go to the field of marshes, which is this kind of paradise realm where everything's green and there's hunting and the happy hunting ground kind of thing.
Okay.
But then other times it will say you join the sun god on his eternal circuit through the heavens and through the underworld. So whether that field of marshes is just a stop along the way or if it's a permanent state, and then others will say you will go and be a servant to Osiris. So I don't think these are necessarily conflicting things. I think they're either, it depends on how
They
you
can be
path.
like metaphors, you know?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
they do talk about meeting your deceased relatives.
they do. Yeah, yeah,
So those deceased relatives must be somewhere.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, whether some of them get annihilated or not is it's a little bit vague. In later times, for sure, with Book of the Dead onwards, the annihilation is pretty clear. But in the earlier ones, it's more of a question of, whether this traveling with the sun god is the eternal state, or if there's some other state beyond that, or what.
Okay.
But there's various kinds of positive states that you can achieve, and there's prayers to go, be a servant of Osiris or whatever.
Right. I understand that the Book of the Dead is 80% prayers and spells and things to help to prevent your soul from being destroyed, I guess. But and it is kind of dark. I tried to read it and understand it. That's why I am enjoying this conversation, because it's easier for someone who has studied this. Yeah, that's fascinating. I really enjoy this conversation with you. I hope we can continue talking about other topics.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.